Welcome to the Wave Strength. Innovative pension solutions for a secure retirement. Presented by Pacific Life.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again on another episode of the Wave Strength podcast. I'm your host, Jim Breen, Marketing Director with Pacific Life's Institutional Division. And joining us today is Paul Hance, our Senior Vice President of the Institutional Division's Customer Solutions Group. And Paul, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast here. Really nice to have you back.
Great to be here, Jim.
Absolutely, Paul. For those who may not be aware, you've been with Pacific Life here for a little over 2 years now, and maybe you can share a little bit about your background before coming to Pacific Life, Paul.
Sure, yeah. So I am actually an actuary by background.
Mm-hmm.
For those that don't know what an actuary is, it's someone that does a lot of math for insurance companies. So heavy math in my background. I was previously chief actuary with Equitable. I was at Prudential and Transamerica before that. So really great companies, really a wide variety of industry experience, in particular learning about different products. Super excited to be here at Pacific Life with the team, where we're focused, as the name describes, customer solutions,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's helping plan sponsors with their defined benefit plans, with pension risk transfer, whether it's helping with defined contribution plans, with stable value or lifetime income within stable value, or partnering with health savings account custodians as an example, or other institutional challenges. We're just really excited for all those various opportunities.
Excellent. So let's set the stage for today's episode, which is the need for lifetime income, Paul. Maybe you can give us a snapshot, an overview of where we are right now and why there is this important need for lifetime income, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been primarily focused on retirement for most of my career.
Mm-hmm.
I've dabbled in other insurance areas, but really with a heavy focus on retirement. And it's been a bit disappointing in some ways to see the decline in retirement security over the last 15 or 20 years. If you think back to our grandparents, they had a very robust Social Security along with pensions. If I think about my parents, my mother has some pension from a state pension. My father, not much of a pension, just relying on 401k. And I'm starting to see that shift towards a whole generation of retirees that are going to be retiring primarily relying on their 401k plans and their ability to manage and retain those assets for their life, which is much, much different than when people had a defined benefit pension plan. So it's a little bit scary, I think, for society overall to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think the next several years they're going to be an important time in our history to see what happens, and that's why this is so important for us to try and find these solutions. And I think Pacific Life really is looking through the lens of a hearts and minds approach, mm-hmm. which I encourage our listeners to check out our other podcasts where we do talk a little more in depth about our DCLI focus, our defined contribution lifetime income focus. But getting back to the purpose of this episode, the need for lifetime income, you mentioned earlier, Paul, that you were meeting with some Senate staffers, and they shared some interesting insight into what they're seeing. But it is a real concern that I think a lot of people are having.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, at times it can be a bit depressing to hear about some of the gridlock in Washington, D.C. these days. But, in my discussion with some of the Senate staffers, came across wide and clear. This is something where there's strong bipartisan support, mm-hmm. Because they see there's a very, very clear challenge and very clear problem coming down the horizon as it relates to what they literally said, we're all concerned about starving elderly people, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a very, very stark way to put it. But if you go back 100 years before the pension system, before Social Security, I mean, that was happening. The real issue. That was
that was happening, and it's hard, and it's hard to talk about that because right now when you say that, you say, oh no, that only happens in movies. But just to do a quick Google search back, and you could see that it truly was. It was very difficult, mm-hmm. and it was a scary time. I think a comment that you made in our discussion earlier before the show, Paul, you were mentioning that somebody in that meeting, one of the staffers, was commenting that it was perplexing to them that here we have currently, so much concern for the nation's current gas prices, mm-hmm. Which are high, but yet we don't have the same level of concern for what they see coming down the road, which is that this crisis, that's this potential crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one where there's that strong bipartisan support. Everyone agrees, but it's not going to make the evening news because it's something that's down the road. It's very impactful, but it's not immediate.
It doesn't get the headlines.
It doesn't get the headlines, which makes it just makes it harder to prioritize doing something immediately, which is a bit unfortunate in terms of it's a bit unfortunate, but I think it just reinforces that it's such a problem. There's that bipartisan support. A great example of that was with the Secure Act passed back in 2019, almost unanimously, passed the Senate. Which, if you think about what's happened in 2019, it's pretty impressive to have an issue that can get that level of support on a bipartisan basis.
And now we're looking at the Secure Act 2.0, and I think you were talking a little bit about that with these staffers.
Yeah, so there's great progress on Secure Act 2.0. In the Senate, it's the Rise and Shine Act. But in terms of the actual impact, it's one of many. So it's not going to solve it, but it's clearly, and that was clear in our discussions, it's clearly a step in the right direction. And there's that bipartisan commitment to continue to work on how do we solve this problem? How do we ensure that that Americans can retire securely? And to your point, it's not just sometimes it's thought about, oh well, it's only a 5% probability, it's only a 10% probability that I live to 100 and run out of money. It's a low probability, and it is a relatively low probability, but what comes with that is the fear, right? So there's a big difference between living in retirement and having enough money ultimately, but living in retirement with that fear versus not having that fear, because that has a substantial impact on quality of life.
Absolutely.
Just today, stock market's down 2% today. Tomorrow it'll probably be up 1%. The next day might be down. But just think about the fear. If you have no other options to live with that fear, it doesn't allow you to enjoy retirement as fully as you otherwise could.
Exactly. I mean, that wellness in retirement is so important, to work so long and to then be able to enter that new phase of life with anxiety free. I mean, those of us with children know that when they have their children, I'm sure that life won't be exactly anxiety free as my parents can attest to raising me, as a matter of fact. But I think, Paul, that this is obviously an important conversation, and a testament to what Pacific Life has done. Pacific Life really has afforded so many resources and focus on this, the need for lifetime income in our defined contribution lifetime income space. And, I think that is so important. Maybe you could share a little bit about what we're doing at Pacific Life from an innovation standpoint.
Yeah. So as it relates to trying to solve this problem, one thing that's somewhat unique about Pacific Life is we are customer owned. So we exist for the benefit of our customers. We have no shareholders. Everything that we earn, we want to be sustainable. All of those earnings go back into developing products and solving our customers' problems. So that customer ownership really drives us to what are the biggest problems our customers have out there today, and it's really around financial security. Even for the higher net worth, obviously there's a great ecosystem for them that helps provide them with that guaranteed income. But for the vast majority of the population, they're really relying upon their employers in many ways to provide them that ease of financial, to provide those benefits, to provide that pension-like income. That's what they look to for their retirement ultimately. So in terms of Pacific Life, there's been just great support from whether it's Daryl Button, our new CEO, or Jim Morris, our prior CEO, just a very strong recognition and understanding that this is one of the most existential challenges for society and for our and then for our industry to help solve. But one of the things that we recognize with this is it's not going to solve itself. Yeah. Right. And that's one of the things when I was talking with Jim, our just recently retired CEO, a couple of years ago about the exciting opportunities at Pacific Life with the new institutional division. One of the things that came up was around this particular challenge is, is the market going to develop? Is there going to be a solution? And my response to Jim was, it depends on us. Like, it's not going to solve itself. The insurance industry can't wait for this to be solved and then go into the market. The insurance industry has to devote the resources, the time, the energy, and the innovative mindset towards figuring out what makes sense. And so it's up to us ultimately.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that is so important for our mission and vision of providing financial security through innovative products that it's so important that we need to make the investments in partnership with all of the various partners out there in the defined contribution space. But we need to make the investment to try to solve this challenge.
Yeah, and Paul, it's amazing to see what Pacific Life has done in terms of pouring those resources into this new institutional team, and the support from our management committee. The leadership really has our back in trying to innovate. Let's just switch gears here a little bit and to discuss some stories as they relate to the need for lifetime income.
Yeah, sure. So, as mentioned earlier, I come from a more quantitative background. So I love the numbers. I love the statistics. That all resonates well with me. But at least half the population, maybe arguably more, stories resonate better.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important as we think about how do we resonate with everyone? How do we make sure folks understand? So I think that, we for example, have an economist on the team, Chi-Sun. From a quantitative perspective, you hear about the annuity puzzle. You hear about, there's a Nobel Prize winner in the 80s that talked about this question of, it's so clear that having guaranteed income in your portfolio, some percentage of that is much more optimal than none. It's just so clear from an economic perspective, from an academic perspective. It's very, very clear. And I think when I think about the annuity puzzle, the answer to it is we haven't been telling the right stories. We haven't been explaining that need sufficiently. So, I certainly have my stories, but Jim, I'm interested, just as you think about folks, family members, friends, how many of them feel like they know what they're doing when it comes to financial management, that they have it completely under control and are highly confident? Yeah,
my father, very hard worker, and he worked he was in the Navy, then moved over to the FBI. So he had the luxury of two different pensions, right? But even as he approached retirement, I'm one of 8. So he still had a lot of more responsibilities as he approached, the average age for retirement. But my father is definitely one to research. But there are many people that don't have that luxury of family members, right? There are folks that are out there that don't have that ability to connect with a loved one to help them, or they're just going at it blindly, And it's sad, but it's more of a reason why this is the need for education is so important. And we've talked about that before in prior podcasts, Paul, like this need for education, this need for a story-driven approach where you can tell the story. And it might not be the story that everyone can relate to, but I feel that when a user can see that you have the compassion, that you're trying to understand where somebody is, the better off you are, and the more connected the overall conversation can be.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jim. And I think one of the things that I find as we discuss this challenge with whether it's team members, whether it's customers, whether it's just our friends and family, everyone has stories of folks they know that have challenges around financial management. It's a substantial, I believe, portion of the American population. And then right now we're going to rely on them to manage their own finances when we don't rely on them to build their own houses, to build their own cars, to do all these other things that require a significant amount of technical expertise. I know, for example, from my own experiences, Jim, my mom and dad only had 2 kids. So so you're a couple more. I have 2 kids. I have 2 kids, and you have 4 kids, and I'm always very impressed by that, Jim. But
those listening can't see all the bags under my eyes. And Paul looks very well rested. So with only 2 kids,
relatively, absolutely. But I see that dynamic for example, with my mom, right? So she was, she was a nurse's aide. We're just obviously, hopefully at the tail end of this pandemic most recently, but we've probably had a newfound appreciation for just the importance to society of the work that, whether it's, from doctors to nurses all the way down to the nurse's aide, those medical professionals, just how important that work is for society overall is absolutely essential. So anyways, so my mom is great at that. She was great at that. Super, super nice, much nicer than I am. Super nice, but not good with her money management at all, right? So for those folks that don't know, nurses' aides, I would say pretty well underpaid, a bit above minimum wage, but it was compounded for her by just the lack of financial education. It's really, really compounding. So she was a classic example of the payday loans and the, very high interest, used car loans. Fortunately, she couldn't qualify for credit cards, fortunately, so she didn't have that challenge or that issue. But that's where, as a financial industry, I think we've done a disservice to folks like that, where there's just so many pitfalls that folks can fall into. So, for example, with my mom, fortunately, she was never one to save unless it was done for her, essentially. Never, she was in that 40% of the American population that, doesn't have $400 for an emergency. Right. So she clearly fell into that bucket. And, I think so the challenge for her as she approached retirement was, fortunately, her last 8 years of her career, she worked for the California state healthcare system, working with folks that are developmentally disabled, actually. And fortunately, that did come with the pension, fortunately. But so she had some health issues. She actually had a stroke, so she lost a lot of her mental capacities for a period of time. Fortunately, she's got most of it back, or probably all of it. But the challenge for her was fortunately, I was able to manage her finances kind of post-retirement, right? So I was able to do her 20 pages of pension paperwork, all the medical records associated with that, et cetera. And number one, make sure she took a pension, right? And that's a big, because my mom's a perfect example. Anytime she had any money, if she got an inheritance, for example, there'd be a way to spend it down within a month or two, right? It's just there's a lot of folks that, whereas I'm the opposite, right? I save every penny I have, right? So you have that, you have that spectrum, but it's important for everyone in society that we make it easy for them to do the optimal thing. Yeah. Right. And that's where, especially something as, from my actuarial investment professional background, I see how complex managing investments, managing expenses and liabilities and cash flow. It's very complex. I mean, we have departments full of, pretty smart people that work on this. And it's hard for them. And then we expect the individual,
that average person that's dealing with the normal functions of childcare, making sure that the dinner's ready on time, the kids' homework's done, and that's planning your finances. I hate to say it, but it's probably something that ends up in the background and not the forefront of what they're thinking about in the average day.
Absolutely, and I think the final point on this is it's. I was able to observe, and I'm sure others have hopefully been able to observe this. I was able to observe just the impact of having your finances managed well versus not, right? So I could observe with my mom as an example, when I took over her finances and she had that pension and she had that guaranteed income every month, for her, it's like magic. It's versus the contrast of having to worry about that, just the stress, the hours in the day and the stress, to your point, when you're trying to put food on the table, when you're trying to get your kids off to school, or even in retirement, when you're just trying to enjoy retirement, it makes a big, big, big difference. So I think that's where, as we think about the need for lifetime income, we want everyone to have a secure retirement. Not just the folks that work in they can figure it out and are the do-it-yourselves. There's going to be a lot of folks that can figure it out on their own. But we want everyone to have a secure retirement ultimately.
Well, Paul, I know we can talk about this topic all day long, and there's more to come. We'll have to do another podcast. We'll do a follow-up about this. Thank you for taking the time to share your stories. It's been a great time sitting with you, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you very much for joining us on another episode of the Wave Strength Podcast. I want to encourage you, if you'd like to listen more to this thought leadership content, head over to Spotify, Audible, and even YouTube and search the Wave Strength. And you can see all of the content that we have available. I want to encourage you to like and subscribe that content also so you can stay up to date with the most recent episodes that we put out there. And also to get in touch with Paul, just head over to LinkedIn. You can search Paul Hance with Pacific Life, and you can find Paul on there. Again, I'm Jim Breen, and I want to thank you for being with us. Have a good day, everybody.
This has been another episode of The Wave Strength, presented by Pacific Life. Don't forget to catch us on YouTube and make sure to subscribe. Although this podcast is presented by Pacific Life, the opinions and views expressed are those of the hosts and participants and do not necessarily reflect Pacific Life's views on any of the topics discussed. Pacific Life is a product provider. It is not a fiduciary and therefore does not give advice or make recommendations regarding insurance or investment products. Pacific Life, its affiliates, its distributors, and respective representatives do not provide any employer-sponsored qualified plan administrative services or impartial advice about investments, and do not act in a fiduciary capacity for any plan. Pacific Life refers to Pacific Life Insurance Company, Newport Beach, California, and its affiliates, including Pacific Life and Annuity Company. Insurance products are issued by Pacific Life Insurance Company in all states except New York, and in New York by Pacific Life and Annuity Company. Product availability and features may vary by state. Each insurance company is solely responsible for the financial obligations accruing under the products it issues. This podcast was recorded on June 9th, 2022.